I want you to imagine something with me. I want you to imagine you're invited to a friend's house. It's July. It's a fun thing to imagine in December. It's July. It's warm. Been invited over to a friend's for a little picnic. You go over to their house, and you get there, and there are lights all over the outside of the house. And you think, And you walk in, and you find there's a tree in the corner of the living room, decorated, lights all over it. And you think, wow, they still haven't gotten their stuff down yet? I got mine done by February. Or maybe they're really early. And they begin talking about Christmas and giving presents and all these things. And you go, I never realized how odd these friends of mine really are. I wonder if it's safe to be alone with them here in their house or not. It would be weird, wouldn't it? I mean, it would be weird. And maybe you think, okay, well, it's Christmas in July. But then you go back in August and new tree, new decorations, but it's all there. It would be weird. And yet, there's a sense in which it's right to celebrate Christmas all year. And we hear that. And one of the places we hear that is from the story of Ebenezer Scrooge. One of my favorite stories from Charles Dickens. You know, it's actually a short story. It's very, very short. There are only 5 chapters to the book, and they're quite short chapters, actually. And while Ebenezer is encountering the ghost of Christmas future, he says this. He says, I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I shall not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on this stone. And this is right before he wakes up in his own bed as he's feeling the tombstone there. You know, A Christmas Carol is a story that's always struck me, and I think it's interesting. I think it's one of Dickens' shortest writings, and yet it's probably one of his most well-known to the modern person. You know, most of us had to read some of his other writings that I can't even think of the names of them. It's been so long in high school. But A Christmas Carol, and I think the reason that it grabs hold of me, and I think the reason it grabs hold of a lot of people, is because it's a story of redemption. It's a story of someone's life being saved almost at the last minute. And it's a story of a complete turnaround, a complete redemption and repentance, and a miraculous change in a person's life. And that's a great story. It's a wonderful story. And that's the story of every one of you who are sitting here who have been saved by the grace of Jesus Christ. You have been changed from the person that you were or that you could or would be by the power of Jesus Christ. And I think that's why I like that so much. But this morning, we're going to take a look at several scriptures in this idea of celebrating Christmas all year. And I began thinking about that. And what did Ebenezer mean? Did he mean, okay, we're going to have a tree and drink eggnog every year or every month and celebrate? I don't think so. But there are 3 things about Christmas, 2 very important things that I think everyone, anywhere, could say they think about Christmas. I shared on Christmas Eve that I heard a survey, and I tried looking it up and got part of it. There's one survey, the Pew Research people did one survey, but this other one was called an organization called Lifeway, and I found its reference, but I didn't find the survey itself. But it was talking about the fact that somewhere like 90% of all Americans celebrate Christmas. And that includes high percentages of people who are agnostic or atheist, but they celebrate Christmas. And so I started thinking about, well, why? Why do they celebrate Christmas? What is it about Christmas that they think of that they want to celebrate? And if you talk to people and say, well, what does Christmas mean to you? And two of the things that will come up very often are giving and loving. Family is a big one too, obviously. But I want to think about and just plant some ideas in your mind from the Scriptures about the first two, giving and loving. If we're going to celebrate Christmas all year long, but not walk around with elf hats on all year long, and end up being asked to leave certain places because of that, maybe. What does it mean, giving? So, if you would start by turning to the book of Matthew, Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10. We'll start reading at verse 5. It says, "These 12 Jesus sent out and commanded them, saying, 'Do not go in the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter a city of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out demons. Freely you have received, freely give.'" Now, just before this, in chapter 10, is where Jesus chose the 12. One of the other scriptures tells us that he stayed up in the mountains all night by himself praying, and then identified the 12. And he called the 12 together and he sent them out. And this is what he said to them. And the first part of it kind of makes me go, well, wait a minute. I thought that Jesus came to save all people, but he just told his disciples, just go to the house of Israel. Don't you go talk to any Gentiles. Don't you go talking to any Samaritans. What's that all about? Well, Jesus came as the Messiah of all, but the Messiah as declared and manifested to the house of Israel. And so in several places we find Jesus saying, no, I'm not called to anyone but the house of Israel. That was Jesus' calling. Now, he also ministered to Gentiles. He ministered and healed a Roman centurion's son. Although he spoke to us might seem kind of, rude and crude to the Phoenician woman, and kind of made an analogy that made her sound like a dog eating crumbs underneath the table. Yet he did minister to her, and he ministered to others. But his calling was to the house of Israel. And so we need to understand that was God's plan from the beginning. You read in the Old Testament that Israel was called to be a light to the Gentiles. That the revelation of God would come through Israel, and that the Messiah would come through Israel, and all the history for over a millennia of the history of God taking a people and delivering them and placing them in a promised land and giving them abilities and provision in ways that they couldn't come up with themselves. And then he would bring the Messiah, the ruler, the one who would rule all mankind through the house of Israel. Not to be exclusive, but that was his plan in order to be a light to all the Gentiles. And that's exactly what's happened in the last 2,000 years. So that's why Jesus says that. He says, go to the lost sheep of Israel. They need to know. And what do they need to know? Well, as you go, preach. Preach. Declare. Sometimes in the morning I teach. Sometimes in the morning I preach. Sometimes I preach and teach and teach and preach, and it gets all mixed up together. But there is a difference between teaching, having a Bible study, which is usually a lot of what we do here on Sunday mornings. It's like a Bible study. It's why people who have never been to a Calvary chapel before walk in, and they kind of go, well, this was really different. Because, the teaching was teaching, not preaching, and we went right by the Bible. There was a minister friend of my son-in-law, Tim, who Tim sent him a couple of my messages from some CDs to listen to. And one of the things the guy said back to him was, first of all, he's a minister in a denominational church, and he went, wow, he went that long? He said, my people won't let me over 12 minutes. And that's not untypical in many denominational churches. But the other thing he said was, and you know what? After I listened to the first CD, it was almost as if, like next Sunday you would come, and it sounded like he was just going to pick up right where he left off, right in the Bible. Well, yeah. Yeah, that's what we do. It's different. It's teaching. But here Jesus says, go preach, go declare, go shout it from the housetops. And what should you shout? The kingdom of heaven is at hand, is here, is here. A lot of people need to know that. People today still need to know that. People are looking for some meaning in life. People are looking for something to make sense out of this wacky, crazy world that we live in. How do I fit this all together? Where does this all come together? I've been following Jesus Christ it'll be 36 years this coming February. I know why this world is as wacky and crazy as it is. Oh, I don't understand every single thing, but I understand the big picture. And so I know most people don't. And I forget that sometimes. They're like, they have no clue. And so they make up all kinds of weird things, but they're looking in their heart for meaning and for truth. And they want to know that there is something beyond this life. And we get to be, just as the disciples who were sent out here, we get to be the ones to say, hey, eternity is right at your fingertips. Salvation, redemption, a relationship, a living relationship with God Almighty. It's right here. It's so close. Let me tell you about it. That's awesome. And that's what the disciples were doing. As you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And then he gave them some commands. And these commands blow my mind. Heal the sick. Okay. Cleanse the lepers. Raise the dead. Cast out demons. Okay. Jesus, could we go over that a little bit more and, like the directions? I know we've been watching you do this stuff, but okay, that raising the dead one, that's the one I still, haven't seen it happen often. Exactly what exactly is the prayer I'm supposed to pray? How do I exactly do that? With Lazarus, you shouted from outside the tomb. With the little girl, you went inside and threw everybody else out. How do I know which way to go? And we are that way sometimes, aren't we? We don't really, we read this, we understand it, we believe it, and we look out at the world and we go, but how do I do that? How do I do that? Well, I can tell you, first of all, I have never cleansed a leper. I have never raised the dead. I've had one experience in praying for someone who was delivered from demonic possession. Healing the sick, I can only say I've prayed for a lot of people and I've seen some people healed. But there's a key in what Jesus says, and he says it after he gives them those 4 commands. He says, freely you have received, freely give. Now, there's a couple of things that we get out of sorts in this whole idea of giving. First of all, you can only give what you have.